Because pressure is now mounting on Mr. Speaker to resign after proceedings descended into, frankly, absolute chaos yesterday.
Yes, Lindsay Hoyle allowed MPs to vote on a Labour motion calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. But that broke parliamentary rules and undermined an SNP motion on the same issue.
But it's claimed Mr. Speaker was pressured into the change by Sir Keir Starmer, who feared that the SNP vote, if it went ahead, would split the Labour backbenches. Sir Lindsay Hoyle later apologised.
I am, and I regret, with my sadness, that it's ended up on like that, in this position. That was never my intention for it to end up like this. I was absolutely convinced that the decision was done with the right intentions. I recognise the strength of feeling of members on this issue.
A visibly emotional Sir Lindsay Hoyle there. Well, joining us now is our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Very good morning to you, Olivia. And it was chaos in the Commons last night, wasn't it?
It was absolute chaos in the Commons, Ellie. I've never seen anything like it. Both the SNP and Conservative MPs stormed out of the chamber and refused to vote on this motion on Gaza. Speaker Hoyle is now in a very precarious position indeed. And frankly, that is really unprecedented situation. Just a few weeks ago, you would have struggled to find anyone in Westminster who had a bad word to say about Speaker Hoyle. He was seen as the replacement to John Bercow, the safe pair of hands, straight-laced, straight-talking northerner. But now there is mutiny against him, and Conservative MPs and SNP MPs too have signed a motion of no confidence in him. Now, just to back up a little bit, because I think it's a little bit confusing what exactly happened last night. Yesterday was supposed to be an opposition day debate, and the SNP were in charge of pushing forward a motion. It was basically the SNP's day to have their say. They tabled this motion about Gaza. They wanted an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Now, for Labour, and for Keir Starmer in particular, that was pretty problematic. Last time the SNP posted a similar motion back in November, the Labour Party was completely divided on the issue, and Keir Starmer ended up losing 10 shadow cabinet ministers who refused to follow the Labour line on this. Keir Starmer really wanted to avoid having the divisions in his party, having a spotlight shone on the divisions in his party again, and so he tabled a different amendment to the SNP's motion, which essentially slightly diluted what the SNP had to say. That meant that the Speaker then chose to accept that amendment, which was the unprecedented decision last night, which the SNP felt really undermined what they were saying, and it was supposed to be their day, really. And the Speaker claims, and he claims again and again, that the reason why he did it was because he was worried about MPs' safety. He was worried that Labour MPs who chose to abstain would end up possibly being attacked by constituents who didn't like what they heard. So that's his reason. Will MPs accept it? We could be seeing the beginning of the end of this Speaker.
OK, Olivia, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's talk to political commentator Andy Williams and Conservative MP Philip Davies. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
What do you make of all this, Philip? I mean, you understand the parliamentary procedures. Was this unprecedented yesterday?
Yeah, the Speaker made a terrible decision because basically what he said at the start of the day was that we're governed by standing orders, which are basically our rules. And he basically said at the start of the day yesterday, I've decided that this particular rule, which doesn't allow me to select the Labour motion, is outdated. And so I'm going to ignore this rule and I'm going to select it anyway. And the problem with that is that, you know, when you're governed by rules in the way that you behave, you can't just... It's like a referee in a football match deciding halfway through the match, actually, I don't like this particular offside rule, so we're not going to play on the offside rule anymore. But you just can't operate like that. And this, of course, is what John Bercow was criticised for during the Brexit votes, breaking all the rules in order to shoehorn his own sort of view in. And so he made a terrible decision. And it went from being an SNP opposition day, in effect, to a Labour opposition day. I think it's compounded by the fact that we can't have a situation where we're changing the rules in the House of Commons and MPs are voting differently to how they otherwise might because of a baying mob. I mean, that's the end of democracy when you start having that. But look, having said all of that, I've known the Speaker for many, many years. I believe him to be a decent, honourable man. I think if the Labour Party had gone to him and said, do you know what, we've got a real mess here, if Keir Starmer said, I'm going to lose a load of MPs, I need you to do me a favour, I'm 100% certain that Lindsay Hoyle would have said, well, that's not my problem. But Keir Starmer, it seems, went deliberately and said, I'm worried about the safety of MPs here and the security of MPs, and Lord knows what will happen if we're not allowed to do this. And in effect, the implied bit was, and if something does happen and you don't select our amendment, it'll be on you. And
is that in any way a valid point?
Well, I don't think if you're in Parliament, you can't literally appease baying mobs. I mean, otherwise, all you do is encourage them to be even more terrible and even more intimidating. And Lindsay Hoyle as Speaker, and before that as Deputy Speaker, has always put the security of MPs. He's made a big thing of that. And I think Keir Starmer knew what buttons he was pressing when he said that. And so I think Lindsay Hoyle thought he was doing the right thing. I genuinely think that. I don't think he was trying to be biased towards Labour in a party political sense. I think he made a bad decision. But I don't think on the back of making a bad decision he should resign as Speaker. I mean, if we all lost our jobs every time we made a bad decision, I'd have left as an MP 19 years ago and I'd probably be kicked out every single day of the week. So I'm not one of these sort of baying for his blood. I think he made a bad decision. I think he probably regrets the decision he made. I hope he won't make it again. But I think on that basis we should move on.
Mm.
Andy, let's go over to you, shall we? Because this has become about the chaos and not about the issue. And it's really interesting looking at Sir Lindsay Hoyle and talking about MPs' safety. We're actually talking here about an issue which is a very real backdrop of divided communities. It is a divisive issue. It's something that people feel very, very emotional about. And how do you think those people in those communities feel about the scenes that we're seeing in Westminster?
Well, I'm sure they'll be disappointed, to say the least, that the issue, and it's an incredibly important one, has been overshadowed by chaos in Parliament. But as we've seen, it's an incredibly emotive issue. And I think that is why it's produced this outcome. It's kind of an unprecedented, a very unusual thing to see Parliament in chaos like that, to see people on the Conservative and the SNP benches walking out. And yeah, it's, as I say, it is a very, very emotive and divisive issue and a very difficult one.
Mm. Do you think people care about, I mean, obviously the procedures in the House of Commons are important for what they do within the House. Does it affect, do we care as members of the public who don't know how these things work in the first place?
I don't think it's really about parliamentary procedure. The important thing is that this was about Parliament taking a view on the situation in Gaza, on whether there should be a ceasefire. And I think we should care about that decision, that vote being taken appropriately and done in the right way. That's the important thing.
Which, of course, now it hasn't been.
Which it hasn't been. And so the decision that the House came to, as far as I understand, and Philip can come in on this, it's not been taken in the appropriate manner.
Mm. Well, it wasn't. No decision was really taken.
Right.
But it was in effect the Deputy Speaker sort of accepted that the Labour motion had been nodded through. But I mean, it was carnage in there. I mean, it was chaos.
Have you ever seen anything like that?
In my 19 years in Parliament, I've never seen anything like that. And actually, to be honest, even when John Bercow was making some more than questionable decisions during the Brexit time, I've still never seen actual chaos like that in the House of Commons. But look, it is an emotive issue. But look, we're paid to do the right thing for the country, for our constituents. I'm a Conservative MP in Bradford. I've got a very high Muslim population. I'm making clear to my constituents that I support Israel in this. I get a lot of abuse for doing that. But look, I'm not asking for any sympathy for that or anything. That's my job, and I'm not going to give in to a baying mob or people who send me intimidating messages. I'm a member of Parliament. You expect members of Parliament to be able to withstand that. We can't have a situation where members of Parliament say, oh, poor me, I can't make this decision because of the intimidation I'm getting. That is not, you can't behave like that, because all you do is you just encourage more of that behaviour if you give in to it.
All right, just very briefly, Philip, then, what does it say about Keir Starmer? If he's done what he said, what you said he's done.
Yeah, I think there should be more questions about him, the way he leant on the Speaker. And look, it tells you everything you need to know about Keir Starmer, is that he's the one who is influenced by a baying mob. I mean, he'd already changed his position on Gaza because of all the abuse he was getting. And I think there should be more focus on the approach that Keir Starmer took, as opposed to the Speaker, who just simply made a bad decision.
OK. Philip and Andy, thank you both very much indeed. Good to see you.
Thank you very
Let us know what you think about that. gbviews@gbnews.com.